Welcome, everyone. It is good to see you and Search Committee. It is wonderful to be back together again. We were together last night at dinner as we continue this candidacy weekend and candidacy process. And let's see, I don't know if we have, I don't think we have others with us right now. But what I'd like to do is, actually, I think we might have a few. Actually, we do have a few. Okay. But I would like to make sure that we continue as we have planned because, Angela, I didn't ask you this, but I'm hopeful that you will agree that we might post this to our archives later, because I already had a church member earlier today ask me if they can watch this later because they want to get to know you better, but aren't going to be able to be with us during the time that we're actually doing it, but can watch it later. And I said, well, our goal is to archive. So that's our plan if it's all right with you. But obviously it's your life story. So
Sure.
we'll go with that. But my name is Dawson Taylor. I have the great privilege of serving as a senior minister, and I look forward to the great privilege of calling Angela Wells-Bean Reverend Angela Wells-Bean a colleague, but I already have the privilege of calling her a friend and a colleague at large. We know each other from obviously serving together in the United Church of Christ, as well as the Next Generation Leadership Initiative, which I know we'll hear more about later. And Angela, welcome to Paradise. And it's wonderful to have you and Andy and Soren and Emerson and your parents visiting with us. So, and actually welcome home, right? Because you have roots in Florida.
Yes, thank you for having me. It is such a privilege and a blessing to be here with you, Dawson, and with the search committee and with everyone in Naples UCC who's joining us virtually, whose beautiful faces I wish I could see, but I know I will see in the coming days. So yeah, Dawson, do you just want to dive right in with that first question?
Yes, but I also, if you will offer me just a second, I do want to say words of deep gratitude. I want to really say deep gratitude to Louise Brown, who I know probably feels like an aunt to you at this point, because search committee chairs become almost like family to ministers. And so Louise Brown has chaired this search, and I just want to say how deeply grateful I am for Louise in general and her spouse, Bob, because they are just such tremendous assets to this church and members of our church. And Louise co-chairs our Stephen ministry. But I just also want to say how grateful I am to her for chairing this search, because she's done it with such efficiency, but more than that, she's done it with so much joy. So I want to say special words of gratitude to Louise. And of course to Fred Gridley, the one and only, who I have so much respect and gratitude for. Linda Russell, Jane Berry, Molly Baker, Gary Personette, who make up the rest of the search committee. And I pray to God that I didn't leave anyone off that list or mess up anyone's name, but last name. But I just want to say thank you to your search committee, because as we talked about last night at dinner, search committees mean a lot to clergy. And I want to say thanks also to Megan Black, who is behind the scenes, the Wizard of Oz, taking care of our technology today. So thanks, Megan, for your help. And as we begin, I'd like to open us with a word of prayer, if I may. Let's join our hearts. Gracious and loving God, for the gift of this day, for the gift of faithful ministers and clergy leaders, we are grateful. For Deb and for her ministry among us, we are especially mindful as we prepare to thank her and send her to the next season of her ministry and life. And for Angela and her tremendous ministry, we are grateful as we look with anticipation and excitement about what she brings to Naples. We give thanks for Burlington and her ministry there. We are thankful for all the ways that you have led this church in the past, and we look forward to all the ways that you will lead us into your preferred future. And we entrust all of this into your care and ask in your many names. Amen.
Mhm.
Okay, so Angela, one of the many things that I appreciate about you that we share is that we're both preachers' kids, but a little bit of a different journey. So what was it like for you growing up as a preacher's kid?
Yeah, so I have the rare privilege of being a double PK, which isn't common for many folks. So in 1990, my parents moved down to St. Petersburg, Florida, because my dad got called to a UCC church there in St. Pete. And my mom is an ordained UCC pastor, but at the time she didn't have a call to a church. So we moved down to St. Petersburg, Florida. That's where I was raised up until high school. My parents still live in the same house I grew up in. And then in 1991, just 1 year later, my mom was called to a different UCC church in St. Petersburg as well. And my dad served at the church he was at until 1998. So from 91 to 98, my brothers and I went to two different UCC churches, my mom's and my dad's, and they sort of had shared custody of us. And I was confirmed twice, did lots of church milestones twice, Easter, Christmas services, that kind of thing. And
thinking about is like Christmas at two different places,
yeah.
Easter, yeah.
Or like you went to mom's church for this holiday, now you go to dad's church, that kind of thing. And then in 1998, my dad left the ministry and pursued a different career. And my mom is still serving the church, Lakewood United Church of Christ, the church she was called to in 1991. She's still there. That's the church where I was ordained, and holds a very special place in my heart. So yeah, that growing up as a double PK, the physical space of the church was like my second home. We would go there after school to do homework. The first one's there on Sunday mornings and the last one there on Sunday afternoons. We were there early for all events. And so, but also maybe more importantly, the church community, the congregation became my second family. And the adults were they were surrogate parents and friends and mentors and teachers to my brothers and I. And that was really where I learned the importance and the value of the local church on an individual, and specifically how formative and influential it can be in the life of a child. And so it was, an absolutely large part of the reason I went into ministry is because I had I'm blessed to have had such positive experiences growing up in the church. And for people that didn't have such positive experiences, or even had, dare I say, painful ones, as a clergy person, I consider it a privilege to hear those stories. And as people are ready to help heal those wounds when they feel that they're ready to be part of a local church again. And one thing I will add also about being a PK is that I'm acutely aware of personal professional boundaries and work-life balance. I hope my mom isn't watching, and I pray she never will see this, because I'm going to say that didn't always model the best boundaries. My parents didn't, and there were so many nights when they were away at meetings. And I do remember as a kid feeling like I was definitely sharing mom and dad with the church. And so, I take those lessons with me into adulthood and into parenthood, and being cognizant of the fact that, yes, I'm a pastor serving this large congregation, but also a spouse and a parent and a daughter, and to honor those relationships and try to be present for, my family as much as possible, and not have them feel like, they're constantly sharing me with the church. So
I have such gratitude for you naming that. I think that's really important. And, one of the things that we're taught in the Next Generation Leadership Initiative is to be clear about those boundaries. And because of clergy burnout, and which often is brought on by that. So I'm really grateful. And I know you and I have already had some really great conversations about that. So I appreciate you naming that, because like you, I hope my parents don't go back and watch this, but I certainly understand, having only one parent as a pastor, but I certainly understand what you mean by that. I don't know about you, but for me, churches growing up always felt like really safe places. I always felt included and safe at church. And I think that's probably one of the hopes that I've had from my ministry, is that people feel safe and included in churches. And so I think that's probably what drove a significant part of my call story as I was making that decision about vocation and profession. What was it like for you? I mean, is that what drove you from, that, again, I love that image of the shared custody with both parents, for that 8-year span there. But, like what drove you from that experience of being a preacher's kid to make your own decision about being a minister and going off from New College off to Union, and then, coming back to Florida originally and such?
Yeah. So my parents never ever pressured any of us to go into the ministry, even though I come from a long line of ministers generations before my parents. I think that my parents were probably more surprised than anybody when I told them I wanted to go to seminary. And so that pressure wasn't there. However, the values they instilled in us were always that whatever you do with your life, it should be meaningful. It should be life-giving. It should be rewarding. They told us that, that very cliche phrase, money can't buy happiness. So don't pursue something solely for the financial benefit of it, but do something that's rewarding and makes a positive contribution to the world around you. And so it was sort of drilled into me from a very young age to do something to improve the world. And so I knew I wanted to go into a helping profession, if you will. And I was probably in my third year of college thinking about what in the world am I going to do with myself when I graduate? I majored in sociology at New College, so I had learned more than I ever knew about so many systemic inequalities, economic inequality, which is, all these things are interconnected with racial injustice and sexism and LGBT discrimination and all these kinds of multi-layered isms. And I knew that I wanted to spend my life addressing them and serving people who are less resourced in our country and the wider world. And so having all this kind of newfound information in college and feeling very optimistic and encouraged about making a positive difference in the world, I did think about seminary and going into the ministry, but I immediately put that out of my mind. I was like, nope. And I closed that door. I was like, not going to do that. And so then I thought about going into social work, actually, and becoming a social worker. And then I was getting more involved with the wider UCC. I was a youth delegate to General Synod. I was becoming more involved in my mom's church in college. And it kept tugging at me, thinking, I love the denomination and I love the impact that as a denomination we're making on the wider world and the religious landscape. But I was like, I don't want to serve the local church. I don't want to be a local church pastor. So I sort of came to this compromise with myself. And I was like, okay, I'll go to seminary. And I will also want to get my MSW. And so Dawson, I don't think you know this, but I actually applied to CTS and I got in. And I got into the School of Social Work at the University of Chicago, because they have the dual degree program. But I ended up going to Union anyways. And I'll tell you what really solidified my decision was at my grandfather's funeral. Actually, as morbid as that sounds, he passed away in 2007. And that was the year or 2 years before I graduated from college. And I'm sitting again in my beloved UCC church where I was raised, listening to the eulogy. And he was a UCC pastor for the entirety of his career, even before it was the UCC. And it kind of, I hate to use such a biblical image, but it hit me like a bolt of lightning, and I just felt this overwhelming sense of acceptance and relief after hearing the testimonies about his life in ministry and the impact he had on people's lives, and thinking to myself, okay, if I can touch one person's life and have an impact on one person the way he touched so many, it will all have been worth it, and I had been putting up all these defenses and like negotiating with God, like, okay, God, I'll go to seminary, but I don't want to be a local church pastor. I'll do this, but I don't want to do that. And finally it was just like, all right, I'm letting it all go. I'm putting it in your hands, sort of here I am, send me, if you will. And as they say, the rest is all history. I applied to seminaries, got in, decided to follow the path to union, and then reflecting on the formative experiences I had growing up in the local church and how impactful it was for me, I thought, okay, I think I would be an okay local church pastor. And I think I can serve the church through this way. And I want to, as you said, help create a safe, welcoming space for other people similar to the one I was raised in. And so here I am.
Well, I can say that your reputation far precedes that you're more than just an okay local. So we're grateful. Well, I know that you and I could chat the rest of the day, but I believe, Louise, I think you're going to take the lead from here.
Yeah, yes. Angela, let me start by saying how very delightful you have been and how happy we all are that we have had a chance to meet you and get to know you. But I thought the question that I would ask you to reflect on is what it was about our posting that caught your attention.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to echo my gratitude back to all of you for the warm hospitality I have received not only here, but leading up to coming here. And Luis, a lot of that is attributed to you for your constant communication with me and checking in and making sure that I've had everything I need. So thank you for your leadership, and to the whole search committee. But to answer your question, what is it about your the church's posting that caught my attention? I will be honest with the whole church in saying that I wasn't looking for an associate pastor position. And that's not to say anything against associate pastors, but the facts as they are is just that there's a lot more solo pastor positions available in the UCC than there are associate pastor positions. So I hadn't really considered the option, but I was looking for a new call in either Michigan or in Florida because my husband and I had decided that we wanted to move closer to family. And that was the main impetus behind deciding to make a life transition. And my husband's family's in Michigan. And of course, my folks are down here in Florida. So I was looking at the UCC opportunities in Florida, and there was nothing that really was within any distance, like commuting distance of my parents. Everything was on the East Coast or down in the Keys. Nothing was a good fit. So I made peace with the fact that, okay, we probably won't be going to Florida, at least at this stage in our lives. That's fine. So then I pursued some opportunities in Michigan. And then this posting here, for Naples UCC for a minister of congregational care popped up one day, and I wasn't expecting it, but I looked at the profile and said, okay, it can't hurt to take a look. And I just felt so actually overwhelmed with emotion when I was reading that profile, because one thing that drew me to it was the clarity with which the job was described. It was so clear to me that you all had really done your work in terms of knowing exactly what role you want this pastor to play in the life of your larger church and the ministries you want them to really take leadership of. And that's not always the case with associate pastors. Sometimes their jobs are a little more generalized. And so I appreciated the specificity with which you said, this is what we want this person to primarily be responsible for, and what those things were. It was, the minister for congregational care primarily oversees the Board of Missions and Outreach, and pastoral care, and then preaching and worship, and pastoral care and the Stephen ministry. And for me, that was the perfect trifecta. Those are the three areas of ministry that I enjoy the most: preaching and worship, pastoral care, and missions and outreach. And I thought, if I could spend the bulk of my time doing these three things, I feel like I will sort of have won the pastoral jackpot, if you will, in terms of positions, because positions like this for clergy just are incredibly uncommon. And I'm not aware of any other churches actually that have a minister for congregational care that's defined in this way. And so the profile just was so attractive to me. And I knew that I would be a good fit in terms of those roles, but also having the large church experience, I thought would be a great addition to sort of my professional knowledge and experience, because I've served now in a medium-sized church as a solo pastor for quite a while. And I think that being at a larger church will help me to grow and to develop and to stretch and learn in new ways, and to become a pastor, a more effective pastor in a different setting, in different contexts. I'm sure it will challenge me. And then, of course, I do have to give a nod to Dawson, because I know that Dawson is a great senior pastor down here, and I had heard wonderful things about working with him as a colleague. And your church, Naples UCC, has a great reputation in the Florida Conference at large and in the wider UCC. So the combination of the job description itself and being close to my parents and having such an incredible clergy colleague and serving in a great church, a strong and healthy church, I just thought, this just seems like an incredible opportunity. And I shouldn't say this, I didn't actually think I had a fighting chance at getting the job, but I said, well, I'm going to submit my profile and see what happens. And I tried not to get my hopes up. But I'm just absolutely delighted and thrilled and humbled, and still in a little bit of disbelief that this is actually happening. So, yeah.
Well, I remember when we interviewed you, your comment was, you said to your husband, and Andy, look, they have everything that I think a church should have. They have a thrift store, they have a daycare center. So
they do. The daycare center is a nice benefit, as is the thrift store. Yes, absolutely.
I think that Gary has a question for you.
Yeah. Angela, when we were interviewing you, you talked about a program you started at the church, and it was a program that you identified young students, that were struggling in school, and you had volunteers from your church read to them. Be interested in really, how did that start? How did you identify these students, and where is it today?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks, Gary. So, as is the case with many suburban towns, the needs in the community I serve, Burlington, Massachusetts, were hidden, right? If you just get in your car and drive around our community, it just looks like a nice, quaint, quiet, suburban Boston town, a town that's in the Boston suburbs. And it's really hard to see what the needs are and how people are struggling, although we know they're there. And so my church decided to undertake this very intentional process of identifying what were the greatest needs in our community and what did we feel called by God to respond to. And so we looked at mission insight data, which is just demographics of the town, of what your town is now in its landscape, and kind of population trends and what the town or the area will look like in the future. So we looked at demographic data. We did prayer walks. I sent my church leaders out 2 by 2, just like the disciples, and they walked around different neighborhoods in our community, and they walked silently and simply observed and prayed with their feet, and were very present in their space and just absorbed what was going on around them. What did they see? Who did they see? What was being done? What wasn't being done? That kind of thing. And then the third thing we did was we interviewed key town leaders, and we talked with leadership in very different areas of our town, again, so they could help us identify what are the needs you're seeing among the populations you serve. And so throughout this kind of tripart process, it was a conversation that 2 of my leaders had with our superintendent of schools. That was the genesis for bringing to life this reading program. And the superintendent of schools told us there is a apartment complex in Burlington in which the children who live there, on the whole, their academic performance is lower than that of their peers. And because of the way the schools are funded and because of policies, they aren't able to go directly to that apartment complex and offer special services or mentoring or educational opportunities to those students. But the superintendent said, as a church, you guys can do this. And he shared with us, as many educators know, that the simple act of children being read to from a very early age. And then at the age they're able to read, actually reading and having an adult sit with them, just this act of reading and being read to has a huge impact on their academic performance later on in elementary and middle and even into high school, not only in language arts and English, but in all the academic areas. And so the superintendent of schools suggested that we start a reading group for the children who live in this apartment complex. And that's what we did. And it was a lot of work because we were sort of paving the road as we went. We had no manual for how to do this, but we figured it out and we worked with the management of the complex. They allowed us to use space, and we went 2 hours, twice a week for 2 hours at a time. And it was coordinated around the kids' school schedules. So it was after school. And then when it moved into the summertime, it was earlier in the day because they were more available. And it's been incredibly rewarding. We had to pause it because of COVID, and I would love to see it pick back up again. And he even suggested that we add a homework help group to it. So we'd have reading group maybe 2 days a week and then homework help 2 days a week or something like that. But it was a large undertaking for a not very large church, and it was a labor of love. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to pick it up again once COVID is over, because as much as I'm sure it helped the students and children who attended the reading sessions, I'm sure it was just as rewarding, if not more so, for the volunteers who have been part of it.
That's wonderful. And you know that we get more out of it than the kids do.
Yeah.
Well, I think Fred's got a question for you.
We do indeed. Last year, we embarked upon a program to make our congregation at Naples United Church of Christ a certified wise congregation. And like so many other things, COVID came along and kicked that into a cocked hat. Could you tell us a little bit about how you were able to get your congregation in Burlington certified as a wise congregation?
Sure.
Could we maybe breathe some life back into this thing that we were wrestling with last year?
Indeed. Thanks for the question, Fred. So for those who don't know, WISE is an acronym, and it stands for Welcoming, Inclusive, Supportive, and Engaged. And this is a designation that was created by the UCC's Mental Health Network. So congregations that have decided to explicitly be welcoming, inclusive, and supportive and engaged with people with mental health concerns can vote and declare themselves a WISE congregation. It's a similar designation to being open and affirming. You take the vote and then you say we're an open and affirming congregation. It's similar. And my congregation, actually, we haven't taken the step yet of creating a WISE covenant and voting on it because of COVID. However, my church did form a WISE team who was instrumental in bringing mental health awareness and mental health concerns to the wider congregation in a variety of ways. We did a book study. We were planning on bringing in speakers and having small group discussions. And we also have talked a lot about mental health concerns in our worship services, because there's so much stigma surrounding mental health in society at large. And the fact of the matter is that the statistic is that 1 in 4 people live with a mental illness. And so as the numbers play out, the odds are that if you don't personally have a diagnosed mental health concern or mental illness, the odds are or you love someone who does. And the way that the UCC Mental Health Network describes mental wellness is that it's a spectrum, and at any given point in our lives, we are somewhere on the spectrum of mental wellness or unwellness, and we all experience struggles with our mental health at different points in our life, and that might be triggered by a loss of a loved one or an illness or a job loss or the ending of a relationship. There's so many things that can trigger mental health struggles, and we all come out of them or don't in different ways. But the point is that the church, I believe, has a responsibility to be present for and supportive of people with mental health concerns, just like we're present for people. And we offer pastoral care to people who have physical health concerns. And so in my church, on Sunday morning, we have a sharing of joys and concerns. And it was my goal that just like folks feel comfortable to freely talk about, how they've had a diagnosis of cancer or something else, or they're having a knee replacement or a hip replacement, or they had an injury, these physical things that affect our bodies that we generally comfortably speak about. I wanted us to be able to talk about mental health concerns in a similar way, like I'm struggling with anxiety or depression or bipolar, or a loved one is, and to really kind of remove the shroud of shame and secrecy that often accompany these topics. And so that's been my goal at my church, and it's a constant work in progress. And, when I come down to Naples, I would love to work with the congregation at large, and specifically the Stephen ministry, on having the tools that they feel they need so they can be equipped to offer pastoral care to people who are struggling with mental health concerns.
Well, thank you. That's very good, but no good deed goes unpunished. Do you have any other programs that you've championed back at Burlington that you'd like to chat about?
Sure. I will share just a few of the things that I've been proud of. I made notes of them here. Hold on, let me find them. So one thing that I've been proud of is that our town, I don't know if it's a blessing or a curse, but there is an ICE office right in our town, Immigration, Customs and Enforcement, and it's a regional office for all of New England. And so people who live in Massachusetts and the surrounding states come to Burlington, Massachusetts for check-ins if their documentation status is in question. And so myself and the other clergy in our town started having Jericho walks, monthly Jericho walks, in which we just held vigil at the ICE offices, so people who were going there for whatever reason knew that we saw them and that they had our support as their neighbors. And these Jericho walks up sometimes drew more than 100 people, and including my church members. And this is something that we felt like was an important witness to offer to the folks who were going there, and to let the folks who work at the ICE offices know that the wider religious community in Burlington was paying attention to them. Another thing that I've been really proud of, that I will just say, I'll be blunt, that I would love to see this happen in the Naples church, is that we installed a huge array of solar panels on our church in Burlington, which has cut down our energy costs significantly. And of course, it has made us much more environmentally friendly. So I would love to see a huge array of solar panels on the Naples church. I'll just make that plug. But that's something I'm proud of, because it was a large undertaking and a lot of work to figure out how to make it work successfully. Another thing I've done at my church is we've started having monthly book clubs, which I know happen here in Naples, but we've read books such as Waking Up White and the Book of Joy, which I know the Clergy Roundtable discussed. We read Climate Church, Climate World, which was written by Reverend Dr. Jim Antal. He's the former conference minister of the Massachusetts Conference. He wrote a book about how the church can respond to climate change, and it's written from a UCC perspective. We also read Blessed Are the Crazy, which is written by a UCC pastor, Reverend Sarah Lund. I know you guys have brought her down, and she has written a few books now about how the church can address mental health concerns. We also read Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson, who founded the Equal Justice Initiative, which is a fascinating book. I highly recommend it. If you haven't read it, I believe a movie was just made. Another thing I did at my church that has been very meaningful in a variety of ways, and ways I didn't expect, was I had office hours there bi-weekly at a local coffee shop, which kind of took me, the pastor, and into the community and brought the church out into the world. And so I made connections with the wider community, with people I never would have met having sat in my office at church, but it also made me more accessible to my congregants so they could get together with me out in the community rather than only at church. We participate in the Boston Pride Festival every year, which has been really rewarding, witnessing to LGBTQ equality and letting folks know that the church is open and welcoming of people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. And so I could go on, but there are lots of things my church has done, that I have initiatives I've led that my church has enthusiastically supported during my tenure there. So thanks for asking, Fred.
Oh, thank you very much. I think Jane might have a question that would follow up with that.
Yes. Well, you've done so much in the relatively short period of time that you were in Burlington. It's really overwhelming, and we're excited to hear about that. I'm sure you'll have many good ideas to bring to us. You talked a little bit about books that you were reading as part of your book club, but I do recall that there were other writers, Christian writers, that you in fact have studied and enjoy very much. And I wondered if you could share more of that with us.
Yeah, sure. So, gosh, so many, but I'll keep my list short. So Marcus Borg is a writer who's been very influential in my theological understandings. He comes from the Jesus Seminar. And for folks who don't know what that is, it is an organization of theologians and scholars who have kind of tried to get at the heart of the historical Jesus and understand the gospel stories and Jesus' teachings and ministry from a historical perspective. He wrote The Last Week, among other books, and it's just gave me fresh eyes in terms of understanding Palm Sunday up through Easter Sunday. And he also wrote books about, I believe he wrote one called The First Christmas. And again, helping to kind of strip away all the mythology and the stories that have evolved around the Christmas story and strip all that away and get to the heart of what the gospel writers intended when it was written, and read it with fresh eyes, almost as if hearing it for the first time. So Marcus Borg, Reverend Dr. James Cone has been very influential on me. He passed away recently, but he was a professor at Union Theological Seminary, where I attended for many, many years. The founder of Black Liberation Theology, just an intellectual giant, wrote many books, including Black Theology and Black Power, A Black Theology of Liberation, The Cross and the Lynching Tree, and really reading the Bible through the eyes of people who have had enslaved loved ones and now living in the United States, kind of feeling like second-class citizens, and reading the Bible through their eyes and understanding the scriptures from a liberative perspective, and understanding my relationship with God as one who is on the side of the oppressed and advocating for the oppressed. And I'll segue into Mary Daly, who, if James Cone is a founder of Black liberation theology, she was a pillar in feminist liberation theology, and reading the Holy Bible through the eyes of women, and really learning about who wrote these stories, primarily men, and what were their intentions and their motivations, and why are there so few women named in the Bible, and who are these characters that we don't, that aren't named, that maybe seem very insignificant, that played larger roles than are at first apparent. And she wrote books like Beyond God the Father. So again, understanding God away from this patriarchal, masculine kind of depiction of like this old man sitting in the sky, but relating to God in new and different, and dare I even say feminine ways. So Mary Daly. And then I'll mention two other authors. Sue Monk Kidd is actually a fiction writer, but she brings biblical stories to life through her imagination. And while they are fictional stories, they are rooted in biblical research and historical accuracy for the time period in which they were written. So I highly recommend her most recent book, The Book of Longings. And then the last one I'll mention is Anne Lamott, who is an author who writes vulnerably and honestly about her life. Most of her writings are autobiographical, and her life of faith, and when it has been strong and when she has been lacking. And I was very influenced by her book, Operating Instructions, a journal of my son's first year. And I read that when I was pregnant with my first son. And she is a recovering alcoholic, and she writes very honestly about that too. And she weaves in her relationship with God and her relationship with the church in all of her books. And I just find them to be very accessible, especially when I'm struggling with my faith. So those are a few of the authors I'll mention. Of course, there are so many more.
Well, it's astounding how much you can read, given how busy a life you lead with two young children, I might add. So I think Gary's going to have a question for you now.
Okay. Angela, you've been very involved in serving the UCC on a national, a regional and a local level. What is it about UCC that inspires you to make that commitment, of time and support, especially with you, being the pastor of your church and your family and everything else? So we'd certainly be interested in hearing about that.
Yeah, that's a great question, Gary. So I firmly believe that in the American religious landscape, the UCC is sort of the best kept secret. There are people around the country that, and I'll just stick with our country, but I'm sure we could generalize this to the wider world, that are longing to hear our message of inclusive and liberative love and liberating love. And they just don't know that a denomination like ours exists, which is sometimes hard for me to believe because I was raised in the UCC and I live it and breathe it. But there are millions of people who still don't know that there are churches that openly welcome LGBT people, or churches that, are wrestling with racial justice. They don't know that there are churches that actually acknowledge that climate change exists, yet are trying to do something about it. They don't know there are churches that even ordain women. I mean, here in 2021, I've met people when I tell them what I do for a living, and they still say, like, I didn't know women could be pastors, which is sort of like, it's mind-boggling. But what it says to me is that, for one thing, we're doing we could do a better job, I should say, of getting the word out about who we are. But also that there are people yearning for a faith community in which they are invited to bring all their questions and their doubts and their wonderings, and that we're not this dogmatic place that insists that they check all these boxes before they're able to be, an active member of our church, but that doubt and belief are two sides of the same coin, and faith and doubt are two sides of the same coin. And that we create the safe space to question the Bible and to read different versions of it and to wrestle with how it applies to us today. And that, it's not this text that is, was handed down by God on one day and is forever unchanging and forever unquestioned. I like to say we take the Bible literally, but not seriously. And that, we take it seriously, but not literally. And then, as Madeleine L'Engle, the famous author, she said that the Bible is truth, not fact, and there's so many people who don't know that churches like ours exist. And so that's the primary reason why I'm so committed to the UCC, is because we have an incredibly important role to play in society. And I believe a life-saving role for people who are looking for authentic community, for that place to connect with other seekers and believers, and to connect with God more deeply through scripture, through prayer, through sermons, and of course through music, which Naples offers, incredible music. And so, part of my goal throughout my pastoral career is to just do all that I can to spread the word about who we are as individual churches and congregations, but who we are as a denomination, because, we really do, I think, have the power to save lives. So yeah, that's Gary. That's why I'm so committed to our denomination. And here comes Dawson.
Had some more. I wasn't sure yet.
Dawson brought me water. Water in the wilderness.
All right, well, Jane's got another question for you.
Oh, Jane, you're on mute.
Dawson mentioned earlier about the Next Generation Leadership Program, which I gather is something that UCC does, and that you have been a part of that as well as he has. And so can you tell us a little bit about that? I don't think many people understand what that is.
Sure. So NGLI is the acronym, and it stands for Next Generation Leadership Initiative. And it was founded by, and still is sponsored by, the pension boards of the United Church of Christ. And I have to give a shout out to Mike Downs, who was the CEO of the pension boards at the inception of NGLI and has been a huge supporter of it. And what this is this is a program that was created for clergy under 35 years old who are committed to long-term ministry in the local church. And to be part of the program, you have to commit to serving in the local church for at least 10 years. And one of the reasons why this program was created is because there's an incredibly high attrition rate of pastors in their first 5 years of ministry, and they leave ministry because they don't have the tools and the support they need to manage and respond to all of the different problems and issues and stresses that affect a local church pastor. And so the pension boards decided to invest in young clergy and equip them with the tools, resources they need to serve the church as effectively as possible and be adaptive leaders, so that in this ever-changing religious landscape, we have the tools we need to be pastors going into the future when the definition of church is constantly changing. And so it's not this, kind of, all right, here's your toolkit for serving in, the early 2000s. No, it's like, here are resources that you'll be able to use to be an effective and adaptive leader as the church constantly changes, which we're in the midst of a great evolution now. And so it started in 2010, and they admit a small class of young clergy every year. And it's quite a selective program. You have to apply and be accepted to be a part of it. I was admitted to the class of 2024, which means I began in 2014. And Dawson is a year or two ahead of me. I don't know exactly which class Dawson is in, but so I will be done in 2024. So 2021 is my 8th year. And the way it works is the first 4 years of the program are structured curriculum, and you attend conferences twice a year. And each year you focus on a different topic in ministry and leadership. And the conferences are organized by the pension boards, and you attend them with your cohort of 12 to 13 other clergy. That's the first 4 years. The last 6 years are individualized learning, and you put together a learning plan for that year of what area of ministry you want to focus on. And the pension boards gives you a funding to pursue that specific learning goal. And so that's the 4 years and the 6 years. And they also seed our pensions with a little bit of money, which is very nice, so that we can retire and not be impoverished. And it's just an incredible program, which is to support young clergy and invest in the future of the church. And it was only originally funded to go from 2010 to 2020, but because of the success of it and because of the reputation it's gained, they have extended it, I believe, for at least 10 more years and committed to funding it for another 10 years of classes. So it's a wonderful program. I believe we are the only the second church in the entire denomination to have 2 pastors on staff who have both been a part of it. And I feel very blessed and grateful to have been admitted and for all that I have learned from it.
Wonderful. Well, I think we'll benefit from it for sure. Thank you. And I think now Molly has a question that she's going to ask you.
Yes. Well, we've heard a lot about how impressive your programming accomplishments are, and they are wide and varied and very impressive. But in your profile, you spoke to the heart of ministry in telling us the story, the warm and caring relationship you had with church member Marion. So I'm wondering if you'll share that story again.
Sure, I'd be happy to, Molly. I love this story. So Marion was a church member in Burlington, and she was 99 years old in 2019, and she'd been attending our church since she was in her early 20s. And so she'd been there for over 80 years and had seen the church through so much, and was just she was actually a very, very small and petite woman, but was a giant in the life of our congregation. And I'm sure I will learn who those giants are in Naples too, because every church has them, the people that have been around for an incredibly long time and are just a wealth of institutional and historical knowledge. And Marion was beloved. And I went, and I should add that she had outlived 2 husbands and had no children throughout her life. So she was now a widow, and she did have some extended family, but did not have any children or grandchildren. And so when I went on maternity leave in June of 2019, I told my church administrator, I said, there are only 2 reasons I want to be contacted while I'm on leave. And that is if the church building is burning down, I want to be notified, although I live next door to it. So I would probably just be able to tell. And I said, I want to be notified if anything happens to Marion, because she was 99 years old. And of course, her health was declining. And sure enough, I got a call one day from my admin and said, you might want to check in with her caretaker because Marion really isn't doing well. And so I called her caretaker, who was also a member of my church, and I got an update on her, and she said, Marion would love to talk to you. And so she puts Marion on the phone, and she and I are speaking. And this is about 3 weeks now after my first son was born. So we're talking late June 2019. And she puts Marion on the phone, and we're talking very briefly because her voice is so soft and labored. But she manages to say, I want to meet Soren. And that was my newborn. And Marion is the kind of person you don't say no to, right? Again, we all have those people in our lives and in our churches. And so I said, okay. And nowadays with COVID, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, would that even be possible? But thank God this was all before the pandemic. And I was able to safely, without a second thought, bring my newborn over to her condominium. And I held him in my arms, and I walked into her room, and she was lying in her bed, and she just absolutely lit up, and she got this smile on her face. Makes me emotional thinking about it. And she was just so thrilled and delighted to see me, but more importantly, to see this new life, right? And to see so much hope and potential for the future just embodied in this one tiny little human, as I'm sure so many of us see in babies, which is why they're miraculous for a variety of reasons. But and then I'm with her, and she touches him, and she holds his hand, and she says, I want you to offer a prayer, or will you pray with me? And so of course you don't say no to Marion. And so she's holding his one hand, and I'm holding him and holding her. And I'm there in the presence of the Holy Spirit with the youngest member of our congregation, who also happens to be my son, and the oldest member of our congregation, who is days away from taking her last breath. And I offered this prayer that was just so sacred. And I don't even know what words I said. That was a Holy Spirit moment. They flowed through me. I said what Marion and Soren needed to hear. And I just felt like, I was a conduit connecting this new life and this old life, and it was holy. And I live for moments in ministry like that, connecting people with one another and connecting all of us with God, doing the best I can to do that. So,
that's just a wonderful story and a wonderful memory, I'm sure.
And I will add that Marion did pass away just a few days later. So that makes it even more special, I do think. Yes. So Linda, I think you have a question.
I do. Angela, in your profile, you also said that it was an exciting time to be part of the local church because we were in the midst of a great evolution. And then you closed with a refrain from the Canticle of the Turning that says, and the world is about to turn. Can you tell us some more about that?
Yes, I will. So I'll refer to Diana Butler Bass, who is a theologian and a religious researcher, and she kind of studies religious trends and has written lots of books about this. And she says that the old model of the church was belief and then belonging. You identified as a Christian, you had these traditional Christian beliefs, and then you found the church, the local church, and found a place of belonging. And generally speaking, people had an identity with a specific denomination, and they went to that denomination's local church in their community. So if you were Catholic or Episcopalian or Methodist or Presbyterian or Congregational or whatever, flavor of Christianity you just went to that local church because you had these beliefs and you found belonging in that congregation. And what she says now is that the role is reversed, and we've gone gone from belonging to belief. And so belonging is more important to people. That, the name on the sign outside of the church or the denomination that the church affiliates with is so much less important to people. Now they're looking for a place where they feel connected with others, where they feel like they can be themselves, they feel comfortable, where they feel like the church is engaging with the wider world in ways that they believe are meaningful and valuable. It's a place, they're looking for places where they feel like they can make a difference and where they can share their gifts or cultivate them. And so people are looking for a sense of belonging. And then once they find that church that kind of, meets those needs and shares their values, then they get to the place of belief. Then now once I've got my church home, now they sort out, okay, what does it mean to be a Christian? What are my beliefs? What is my theological understanding of a lot of these events in Jesus' life and ministry and these Christian teachings and Christian theology? So we've gone from belief to belonging, and now we're going from belonging to belief. And people are seeking, and I think that is part of what makes it such an exciting time to be in the local church, because there are no more prerequisites, right? There's no more, we have to do this, or we should do this, or, this is the way we've always done it, or we're not, being the church as we should be, if we're not doing X, Y, or Z. And now people are part of the local church because they want to be, not because they feel like they have to be, not because of some kind of social pressure. And so what we have now is that our pews that are full of people who are there because they want to serve and be served, and because they want to embody and live out Christ's teachings as best they're able. And it's not just, for social status or social belonging or some of these other superfluous reasons. And so I don't agree with this rhetoric that the church is dying, that churches are closing. Well, churches are closing. I don't believe that the church at large is dying. I do believe we're evolving into something more authentic. And I believe more closely related, actually, to Jesus' life and ministry, and moving away from the Christianity that has evolved over 2,000 years, kind of starting with Constantine and the Council of Nicaea, which, if you hold that up as compared to Jesus of Nazareth, it doesn't really reflect what he taught. So I think in a lot of ways, we're getting back to the heart of Christianity, if you will. And so that's why I think it's really exciting. And to speak to your other point, Linda, the Canticle of the Turning is a hymn that I highly recommend that all of you just put that right into Google or YouTube and listen to it. It's beautiful. It's actually from Mary, Jesus' mother, from her perspective. And it is a musical take on the Magnificat, the prayer that she offers when she finds out that she's pregnant with Jesus. And that is the refrain that the world is about to turn. And we are at the precipice of something new and exciting. I think about COVID and how it has launched so many of our churches into the 21st century in ways that we probably would have dragged our feet getting there otherwise. Although I know Naples was more technologically advanced than many of our local churches. But thinking about, wow, what is a church capable of now that we have implemented all these new technologies? I also think about climate change. Reverend Dr. Jim Antal says that climate change is the moral imperative for the church at this moment in human history. And how are we going to respond to that and work with people of other Christian traditions and other faith traditions to heal this world that God has blessed us with and trusted us with, and that we have, it is incumbent upon us as people of faith to take care of God's creation. And so these are just a few ways in which I believe the world is that we are co-creating with God to turn the world hopefully closer to God's will, so that we're all creating a place which is in greater harmony with what God wishes for us, and is a healthier place in which we can all live more peacefully and more abundantly, and create a world that is even better for our ancestors, our children, our great-grandchildren who will come after us. So Indeed, it's exciting, although much change is afoot. So,
Thank you, Angela. Molly has another question.
Yes, we're not just welcoming you, but we're welcoming your family as well. And
Mhm.
so I'm going to be a little nosy and ask you how you met Andy.
No, you can ask me that. That's okay. I will tell you all that I really am an open book. So as you're all, this for the search committee and everyone who's watching, as I get to know you, all of you as individuals, if you have questions for me, by all means, feel free to ask them. And so how did I meet Andy? It is the 21st century and we met online. Believe it or not, when you're a local church pastor in a small town and you live in a parsonage and everyone knows where you live and everything you do has to do with the church, it is sort of hard to find someone. I know, our churches are not exactly filled with young eligible bachelors. I know that's really shocking for people to hear. And you're not supposed to date your parishioners anyways. That's a boundary violation. So yeah, we met online, and I'll tell you really quickly that I had this rule with online dating. I said, I'm not going to message any men. They can contact me if they want to meet me. I was really snobby about it. I was like, they can come after me. I'm not messaging anybody. Well, lo and behold, Andy's profile popped up on my screen one day, and it said, I don't remember much else about it. Of course, the picture was appealing, but it said, I'm a Unitarian Universalist community organizer. And it was all over from there. I broke my own rule. I messaged him. I said, I don't know why this guy hasn't contacted me yet if he's seen my profile, but I broke my rule. I reached out to him. And because I'll just add that in my my dating trials and tribulations, most men I met were at best religiously agnostic and apathetic, and at worst like antagonistic and hostile towards religion. And the fact that I was a pastor was not exactly a selling point.
Yeah.
It was kind of like some of them liked me in spite of the fact that I was a pastor. And so I see this guy's profile who's really good looking, and he said right there that he was Unitarian Universalist. I mean, the fact that he identified his religious tradition, and it's a progressive one nonetheless, I said, okay. And he's a community organizer. I said, I'm going to have a lot in common with this guy. So we met, we started talking, and then we went on a wonderful first date. And I will both tell you that on that first date, we just knew we were going to put our lives together. And so, yeah, that's how we met.
Well, my son and his wife met through online dating too. So it was just a neighborhood one, but I teased them both that they both knew they were cheap when they started dating, because it was only like $35 and not the $150 that you have to pay. So, but it gets good results. I'm very happy with how.
Yes. Yes.
So Linda has another question.
I do. Angela, I know you don't have a lot of spare time, but we'd love to know what some of your favorite things to do, hobbies in your spare time.
No, thanks for asking. Yes, I don't have much spare time these days, but I do love cooking. I love Andy will, he teases me because he says I find the most complicated recipes with the longest list of ingredients. I love cooking. I love experimenting with new flavors. I love baking. And when the pandemic started, I did a lot of anxiety baking. I also love walking and running with our dog Stella. We love traveling. Before COVID, we loved traveling. And so we like hiking, getting out into nature. Andy loves camping. I say that I love being in nature, but I don't love sleeping in nature. I'd rather sleep indoors, but being outside all day is great. And we want to, take our boys and lots of outdoor adventures once we get down here. We love boating. We love being on the water. And so, yeah, I would say spending time outside and spending time in the kitchen pretty much covers it.
Okay. I think Louise.
Yes, getting back to your family, we were wondering last night when we all had dinner together why you named your boys Soren and Emerson.
Thanks for asking. So Soren is my older son, just so everybody knows. He's almost 2. And when I was pregnant with him, we sort of Well, for one thing, naming a child is extremely stressful and anxiety producing. And so we said, okay, we need to be very methodical about this. So we knew we wanted a name that was short. We knew we wanted a name that was easy to pronounce, that was phonetic. You know, it sounded like it was spelled. Our poor boys have this complicated hyphenated last name. We said, we got to give them easy first names, but we didn't want them to be able to be turned into nicknames. And we wanted it to be uncommon, but not like really strange, still a name. So anyway, that was kind of like the list of boxes that the name had to check off. And Soren Kierkegaard is a famous Danish philosopher. And so I'm familiar with him. I read Soren Kierkegaard in college and in seminary, and I really identified with a lot of his ideas and theories. And so that's kind of how I was familiar with the name. And then my husband, Andy, had a professor in college who was named Soren, who he had a great relationship with and thought very fondly of. And so we both had positive associations with this name, Soren. We really liked it. It ticked all the boxes. So, and we didn't want a family name, although the boys, their middle names are both family names, but we wanted their first names to be unique. So that's how Soren became Soren. And then Emerson, same thing, you know, we wanted it to be easy to say, phonetic, can't turn it into a nickname very easily, kind of same parameters. And because Soren Kierkegaard sort of hails from my religious tradition because he was Christian, Andy's Unitarian Universalist, he's like, I would love to think about drawing a name from the UU tradition. And of course, Ralph Waldo Emerson was a transcendentalist, and he was actually a preacher. And Andy serves at a UU. He's not a minister, but he works at a UU church now, where Ralph Waldo Emerson preached, and they have the Emerson pulpit. And we live in the Boston area, and there's Emerson College, and so that name is just kind of in the ether, and we were familiar with it. And it, you know, is a nod to Andy's religious tradition. We both really liked it. It sounds good with Soren. Soren and Emerson kind of go together. And so that is how we got our boys, Soren and Emerson.
So my final question is there anything else that you would like to tell us about yourself that we haven't already touched on?
Nothing specific that I can think of. I would just share my excitement and how excited I am to partner in ministry with you all, to live and serve in the Naples area, to work on the clergy team with Dawson and Sharon. I admit I would love to work with Deb too. I'm kind of sorry to see her go because she's incredible. And I know I have really, really big shoes to fill. And I'm just looking forward to being the best pastor that I can be, also knowing full well that I will make mistakes, and also looking forward to learning from them and having ever deepening relationships with all of you as we all, you know, worship and work in community together to, you know, answer God's call for us on our lives as individuals and as a congregation.
Thank you. Dawson.
Yes, again, I was having lunch today with a member of our staff and another church member, and a different church member walked up and who had met Angela earlier this week, and their comment to me was how infectious Angela's energy and just her passion for ministry is. And I just was thinking after this time together, how I certainly concur with that church member's assessment. So Angela, thank you for your vulnerability and your willingness to share. Again, thank you to our search committee for being a part of this and their engagement and thoughtful questions. I'm deeply grateful. I just want to remind the congregation and those watching and those who will pull the archive that this Sunday is Angela will be preaching 3 times. And that also means 3 times well, not 3 different times. We're not doing the Chicago style voting, Gary, sorry. But we're going to have the congregational meeting where people will be able to vote. It's a hybrid congregational meeting, so people can vote in person after each service, or there will be a survey monkey that is sent out at the beginning of the first worship service at 8 o'clock. I believe that there are still spots available at all worship services. And so we invite you to join us for worship, either virtually or in person. And we look forward to welcoming you either way, and look forward to hearing from Angela, and for a great day of worship that includes Glenn Basham and Adam Zatinsky and Andrew Snedeker as guest artists. And so it'll be a wonderful day of worship, and I know inspiring preaching as well. And so thank you for everyone taking time to be with us, and I wish you a wonderful weekend. And of course, we have an in-person reception Saturday morning at 10 as well. So thank you again, and have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.